So we are talking watermelons and reefers, and we're a little bit kind of everybody's sitting here with like that deer in a headlight look because I automatically hit record by mistake. So here we go, logistics life. Welcome back, everybody. We have our main man Jeff with us today. Jeff, for all you like Jeff said, to not be on the show anymore. That's wrong. He's just had a little bit of a schedule, and his Fu Manchu's got in the way a little bit of him being on the show here. Like, look at the size of that beast. That's like a whole other animal on your face, bro. Love it.
Yeah, and I just shaved it off last week. So no, I'm just kidding.
Maybe last month.
Last month, no, I've had it for a while there, Dean.
Was it maybe 3 months ago, right?
Yeah, no, it's been about 6 months now, I think. Yeah, because what are we? Oh, we're in June. I can't believe it. Unbelievable, right?
Yep.
Unbelievable.
Can you believe the year's half over already?
It's no.
And it drives me to, and maybe we'll have a show about this in the future, but one of the things as it gets to this mid-year is, and I know we were just talking, it's funny how this revolves, Dean? We were just talking about this off air, where it's like, okay, where am I at? Where did I want to be? What are the next steps? What, how far behind or ahead am I from where I want to be? And I think this is the time of year where not too many people actually look at that. Where it's a great time of year, instead of getting into Q4 and going, holy shit, I'm so far behind, and then having no time to catch up, right?
Right.
Yeah, no, I will agree with you 100%. It's a shame. A lot of people out there should have been looking at this probably about 3 months ago, because the way that the market is going. And I mean, Dean, you've seen it as well. I mean, they're talking to the first quarter of 2025, if not the second quarter. It's like there's no reprieve. And, are we at the bottom? We keep on talking about that for months and months. And it seems like it's just, we just lost another carrier. 122 drivers are out now. It's unbelievable. There's going to be a lot more out there. It's feast or famine right now, my friends. The small guys and medium-sized brokers, they may shut their doors. It's a shame.
It's interesting, Jeff, that you brought that up, because Dean just shared an article with me this morning about the banks and them talking about where the market's at. So, Dean, I guess it'd be a great show to get into it. But let's start with the initial ideas and strategies here, because I want to make sure we get the flow here. So we've got watermelon and reefer in full gear. Share us a little bit of stats about that, Dean, and then we'll get into some of the banks and what they're saying about the market.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good segue from Jeff, because there's carriers are under a lot of pressure. Rates certainly aren't going up anywhere. We had on our show last week Adam Wingfield kind of confirming what we'd theorized for a while, not theorized, but surmised that was going on, and that was carriers had made a lot of profit in the last few years, and it was giving them a much longer runway this year. That was certainly borne out by a lot of his customer feedback, customers that he works for as a consultant. So at some point, though, that money runs out, that we both sort of acknowledged. And what I've been watching is produce season to see if there's any lift in produce season at all that's going to give us some joy. And while produce volumes, I'm just looking this morning here, produce volumes are up about 4% year over year. Hard to get a read on produce season at the moment, guys, because around the end of May, there's always a sharp drop-off in weekly volume at the end of May. And then between the end of May and the 4th of July, volumes increase at about 10% week over week for 4 weeks to July 4. So seasonally, we're right on track where produce season would normally be at the end of May. We're not far behind where we would normally be. So that's good news from a produce season perspective. The challenge, though, is that our rate forecast that I'll cover or on our DAT IQ show, the rate forecast is a little bit concerning because our rate cast, normally we talk about, dry van going up 15 to 20 cents a mile in June. Ratecast is only forecasting a 4 cent per mile lift. And in refrigerated, which is more concerning, normally it's 20 to 25%. Ratecast is also predicting a 4 cent per mile lift over the next 4 weeks. So we've just got our first 35-day forecast that includes July 4, which is kind of this produce season impact. And the fact it's so muted speaks to how much capacity there still is in the market. Because on the other side, demand is equivalent to where it was last year, but we've still got a lot more trucks. So that's the challenge. And you talked about watermelon season, Dan. Watermelon season's the second highest volume of produce in the market at the moment. Like I said, if you look at the total number of truckloads moving nationally, potatoes and apples are always up there, tomatoes, but watermelons coming out of Florida are really strong at the moment, and that's giving some lift in rates, but not significantly. The rate movement coming out of southern Florida is kind of down compared to where it was last year. So again, it just reinforces the fact that there's still a lot of capacity in the market, and that's keeping a lid on any significant rate movement. But that's and manufacturing and other things are sort of moving sideways, and the Fed is not talking about interest rate cuts with any degree of confidence to give people some better feelings about the economy. And I think this is sort of, maybe we could segue to what Jeff started the show with about large carriers, and that was that article, Dan, we talked about that was in the FreightWaves. John Kingston wrote about it last week. Great article. He does it every quarter, and it's in your territory. It's the old GE Capital company, BMO, that about 90% of its transportation portfolio is trucking. And their numbers are really alarming in terms of the number of credit write-offs they've had to go through in the last quarter. So it speaks to not so much the owner-operator market, but the entire market in terms of, I guess, Jeff, it'd probably be the larger fleets, but some of the numbers are staggering. It's one of the largest lenders of trucking capital in the industry. Their provisions for credit losses in the first quarter of this year climbed to 56 million Canadian dollars. That's 41 million US. Their previous credit provisions were nowhere near that. Their write-offs, I'm just going to read their write-offs here. They've had like a 7-quarter stretch of, escalating write-offs. So if they had a 56 million this time, the previous quarters were 6 million, 18 million, 19 million, 26 million, and 41 million before the latest quarter this year. So it's at its peak. So, even during the depths of the pandemic in the second quarter of 2020, provisions for credit losses in their transport group was only 38 million. Like their provisions are 56 million now. So write-offs are a pretty big deal. Looks like they're in the second quarter of this year, write-offs soared. And I'm reading straight from Kingston's article, great article on FreightWaves if you can get hold of it. Write-offs soared up to 51 million. Previous write-offs, 10 million, 16 million, 20 million, 31 million. So it kind of shows that we're seeing some of the highest numbers in the history of the banking organization in terms of the number of write-offs that they've experienced in this first quarter. It's a really good indicator, I think, of the health of the trucking industry. And it really points to, we said on the show a little while ago that we're seeing nothing like the level of bankruptcies we did in the second quarter of 2019. We're still not done with the second quarter, right? So we still may see similar numbers that we did in 2019, where we had record numbers of carriers go out of business in that second quarter. And a lot of it had to do with the fact it was such a benign freight market. There was no produce season. There was no lift. Like there was no significant material improvement in tonnage back in 2019, which is pretty much what we're seeing right now. To my point about produce season rates.
I apologize for interrupting, but I'd love your guys' thoughts on something.
Yep.
So my question is this twofold? So one, you've already talked about the fact that carriers, because of the pandemic and how much money they made, they had such a longer runway, right? We
Yep.
look at, so this has been a year and a half, call it, where this really reset freight market has been happening, right? So, that's a pretty long runway. But do you think a second part of this, and maybe a different reason why we're not seeing the mass exodus like we saw in 2019, was people got a little smarter? Whereas in 2019, up until that point, maybe companies weren't paying as much attention to their, they were probably paying attention to their operating ratio, but how much profitability, and is it possible, or your guys' thoughts on, 2019 for the most part kind of quote unquote came out of the blue, right? Like it was a freight recession, and then all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, we're out of money.
Right.
Whereas now, do you think maybe they're monitoring it better, making cuts when they need to make them, instead of when all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, this is dire? Like, do you think there's a little bit of that going on as well?
I think so, because 2018 was a different freight cycle to this one in the respect of on the supply side, because we had record numbers of new truck and trailer orders in that second half of 2018, which flooded the market with capacity in 2019. So it's a little bit different. So that sort of speaks to the new truck order side of large fleets. So there was a lot of excess capacity on the large carrier side. This market cycle, it's kind of the reverse, Dan, because we had a flood of owner-operators coming in buying used trucks into the market. So what you've seen in the last market cycle, bigger fleets have gotten smaller, and the number of smaller fleets has grown almost exponentially. So that's why you're seeing so much more capacity in the market that's more nimble, more agile. And what's exacerbating the problem, though, is, and Tim Denoyer wrote about this in his at ACT Research, is the shift in freight to private fleets, which means less for hire freight in the market. He puts out a volume and a capacity indices every month, and one of the things he said is that private fleets have taken some of the volume for the for hire market. But what he did say was that he doesn't expect because of the private fleet cost disadvantage, because they're more expensive to run, he doesn't think that'll stick, because they will start to shift back to the for hire sector as they start to get further into the year. So that was an interesting trend that I thought he touched on. So yeah, Dan, a little bit different this cycle. I think the point, though, is there's so many things that are different this cycle, right? We'll be talking on our IQ show this week with Ibrahim Bayan about warehouse occupancy rates. I can't wait to hear him answer the question of the week, which is warehouse occupancy rates are heading back towards the long-term average of 6%. So we're still not anywhere near the level of warehouse vacancy rates that, it's kind of regressing back to the normal long-term trend. So I think that's a really interesting trend, because one of the things that fueled a lot of growth for trucking has been the expansion of warehouses, nationally. And even now you're hearing companies like Walmart to compete with, not Walmart, Amazon to compete with Walmart's footprint, which has got a lot of stores very close to populations for same day, next day delivery. Amazon are talking about building more warehouses closer to populations. So there's this massive shift going on in how freight moves that's different this cycle than the previous ones, Dan, because of what the pandemic did to our entire supply chains.
Yeah, you know what? To your point, though, you have the DCs, you have the RDCs, and I think they're going to go to an SRDC. Like you got, what do you call it on the carriers? Super regional distribution centers.
Yep.
That, like you said, are put into a very populated area, probably not as big as the RDCs or the DCs, because they're going to use it as a cross dock.
Yeah.
As fast as it comes in, it's going to go out. I mean, you can just see that. That's the next step. That's what I'm going to predict. An SRDC that's going to be like right in the middle of a huge population that will outbeat anybody. When you really think about next day delivery, it's going to be like within an hour or even less. I see that coming in.
Next logical step, right? like we've all gotten used to Amazon's next day delivery. Now it's going to be, because just the nature of who we are as humans, it's going to be like, how do I get this in like 30 minutes? How do I get this in an hour? How do I get this?
Go figure it out.
It's interesting because, I mean, all the way back to 2016, or actually probably 2015, when the Amazon, quote unquote, Amazon effect really just started to take a hold in our industry. Even all the way back then, I was suggesting to customers, instead of having major DCs in like Calgary, Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, you have mini DCs in Winnipeg, Saskatchewan. Like you have these kind of, instead of having a 30,000 square foot, you put a 2,500 or 5,000 square foot in multiple locations, which allows you, as long as you manage inventory properly, allows you to, and I was more looking at it, not necessarily from a daily distribution, but more from a month-end distribution. I found a lot of customers at month-end, they had all these different orders happening because they were, creating, bonuses and discounts and all that. And then all of a sudden, towards the month ends, we're shipping massive B trains across the country to supply those color stocks or whatever. And I think, so if you look at the way it all unfolded over the last couple of years, I think that kind of went away during the pandemic, just because of the freight. Everything was so screwed up with freight. But I agree, Jeff. I think that's going to be the next kind of operating factor for a lot of companies, is how do we get better at and the last leg of our business? Because I think this is where people, okay, perfect example, okay? So ink for our printers, something as simple as that. For years, I've been driving to Staples, so Business Depot or Business, whatever it is that you guys have in the U.S., and getting it. And it's been $100 for ink, right? So something happened the other week. I was on my way, and my mom called. And I said, I said, like, I'm out of ink. It literally will not print anymore, and I got stuff to do today. So now I got to take time out of my day to go get this ink and come back, right? And she's like, well, why don't you just order it from Amazon? I'm like, I never even thought of that, right? So now we've got ink at a third of the price for double the ink, and it was delivered, I think, in like 9 hours. And so to me, I sit there and I say, okay, do you think for 1 second I'm going back to Staples ever to buy ink again? Never. Right? Because as soon as the ink's low, I pick up my phone, reorder, put my phone down, I go back to work. I haven't taken more than 2 minutes of my time to order ink. I know it's low. It's coming tomorrow. I'm sealed with it. Like, that is, and I don't know if you guys listen to Gary Vaynerchuk, but one of the things he said, and I think this is critical because it's starting to come to fruition. He said, like, you think about it, the next evolution beyond this Amazon is voice. Being able to go, hey, Alexa, order me this business from Amazon. And that's it. So as soon as I'm doing it, I just literally look up, hey, Alexa, order me this, and I go back to what I was doing. And I think that's the next evolution of how we are going, the consumer is going to be wanting to order this stuff. So if companies aren't aligned with getting the product to us, we'll find another product. And what I mean by that is HP's product I have to drive to Staples, pay $100. I got, a no-name product, or I guess a refill product, at a third of the price, and it was delivered in 8 hours. Like, those are two huge variables of way different degrees when it comes to what we're doing in a day. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, Dan, it's I think it's a fascinating discussion. So in terms of capacity, right, what we're seeing is more carriers are joining the industry, but not where they left. Like, so the carriers rejoining are not going straight back into long haul. They're coming back into this, to Jeff's point about these sort of super regional areas. So I think you're seeing this shift in capacity towards more shorter regional, which I think is a great idea because it maps to where you recruit drivers, because there's a lot more drivers coming into the industry that want to be home more often. They're not long distance drivers, which kind of fits the narrative that I've had for a couple of years. And that is that long distance truckload capacity, I think, is going to be always tight. It's very hard to recruit new drivers into the industry to drive long haul and stick at it. It's just such a hard job. Whereas I think there'll be a lot more growth in that short haul area. So, I bought something last week, which is these little these are these little cord holders, little stick-on cord holders. They snap open and they hold your iPhone charger in the car or alongside your bed. Anyway, they don't stick all that good. But the point is, I ordered it on Amazon after seeing it on Instagram, and I'm not joking. This was delivered within about 10 hours. So my question is, in Boston, who's got this sitting in a warehouse somewhere within 100 miles of me? Like, what, first of all, why? Why would you? And this is a product that's made in China. So if you think about the whole supply chain aspect of this, I'm seeing more and more now when I order on Amazon, next day delivery. So it's already happening. We're already seeing the storage of goods in these areas. And I think, Jeff, your super regional is a great idea. Well, it reinforces what you see on ice. Is it 71 out through Harrisburg, Carlisle?
Oh yeah, all the way out there, 81.
Yep.
Yeah.
West Virginia is a massive warehouse market too for distribution. Columbus, Ohio, and then you go further west out to Phoenix, Arizona, which is where you see a lot of super regional locations, and it's strategically smart because it's a backhaul market. You can get freight moved out of there far less expensively than you can out of head haul markets. So you see a lot of that import volume coming into Los Angeles and just getting shuttled out to Phoenix, and then it'll go from there to other fulfillment centers. It's a really interesting business model, but that's something that has changed in the last 4 years that looks like it's stuck. That will stay.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's almost like the automotive PDC model where they got rid of the model of the PDC, the parts distribution center, and they renamed them HVC. To your point, Dean, high velocity center. You can put smaller products in a smaller facility, but you're maximizing the space. Where the smaller ones you can put like maybe 100,000 SKUs in, in 30,000 square feet because they're small, compact compared to a larger where you would need more room and less SKUs in there. So, you can see that on an SRDC, like I said, having these HVCs that hold exactly what you just put up on the screen and get it there within hours. I mean, you can just you can see that happening. I mean, it's a no-brainer, really, when you think about that. And then if they have the larger material, they can always blend it. Blend it with the HVC stuff, like a automotive model, where they'll say, well, if you have this length of material, instead of 10 hours, it may take 20 hours because I've got to do a transfer from a RDC to the SRDC to match it up to go out into the final mile delivery truck. I mean, you could just see the flow. It's got a nice little flow from a DC to an RDC to an SRDC. You could see that happening. Definitely all the way.
Yeah.
And then there's a massive influx in just distribution delivery companies. Like I'm seeing it huge, especially in Ontario. Like there's companies popping up in left, right, and center that just have 5, 6 like U-Haul vans, delivery vans, Ford Econoline kind of things. And they're delivering all day long. Like it's an entirely new business that wasn't around a decade ago.
Right.
When it comes and it's always these white rented vans. So there's like the way I'm seeing it anyways, where I am, and maybe it's the same thing where you guys are, it's all rented. Like half of them are like literally have like enterprise on the side of them because they're rented vans. And so there's zero asset liability, right? They kind of give it back at the end of the month or the end of 2 months or the end of 6 months or the end of a year. So they allow somebody else to take the depreciation. They don't have the major output of buying these vehicles or leasing them. And they just literally go into Amazon DC, load up, and then go and do the distribution, come back, load up, go do the like. And there's these companies everywhere doing like everywhere. And then you got the mix of the companies that I guess are modeling that I'm going to call it affiliate marketing position. And I don't know necessarily if that's the way it is, but they'll go out and create deals with the UPSs, the FedExes, and all this, and then they'll build an infrastructure around that. And now they become the go-to for like small parcel delivery, as opposed to a company, a smaller company saying, okay, well, I've got, 50,000 in small parcel deliveries a year. You go to one of these companies that's got 12 million or 15 million in small parcel spend per year, that get a better discount. Right. So then there's that whole evolution of that business that was built out of what we would typically do, or companies would typically do with their distribution. Then you got the third level of that when it comes to tech, which is the more and more I'm speaking to companies, the more and more they're saying, well, no, I go on like freightquote.com. And it's like now they're doing the same thing. They have this massive spend money. So they're going to the regional carriers and saying, well, I want like a 95% discount instead of a 70% discount. So a company that only would qualify for like a 70% discount now gets an extra 20 points because they're using these companies. And I think that's also shifting the way the market is adjusting to what we're seeing right now.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff, sort of a different question. As you talk to shippers, are you still, we talk about shippers still having pricing power and RFPs still coming in, low single digit numbers. Are you still seeing the same in your side of the business?
Well, with my business, I just landed another big one actually yesterday, and to your point, yeah, I mean the rates are coming down, but I have what it really comes down to is longevity with your capacity. The carriers that you're currently doing business with, how can you keep their assets moving? Um, they're not really looking at profits. They're not going for the big dollar. They're looking for continuation to keep their assets moving and looking to get into position A. So when that market goes, they know that you have the business to keep them moving because they've seen it, they're moving it, they understand that. And we're very lucky that way. I'm finding all my capacity within 60 miles of each one of my shipping locations. So they don't have to travel far. They don't have to burn that fuel. They can send in a pickup driver just to pick up the trailers because it's all drop and hook and bring it back to the yard and then give it to an OTR guy. We're just trying to kind of reinvent what we're seeing out there and still keeping our carriers and the shippers happy because we're going to be implementing a few other things going into fraud, double brokering, theft, and safety. They're all hand in hand. You can't live with one without the other. They coexist. And so that's where I'm putting a lot of my effort in. My partner, we talked about that, and I've talked about it on LinkedIn as well. There's a lot of things that we can do to help carriers be more profitable and waste less time. That's what we're trying to do. Yeah. So, unfortunately, there's a lot of ones out there. We talk about the unethical brokers that are out there that are looking for profits before service. They're going to get the door shut really, really quick. They're not going to move fast. We're moving fast. I'm happy about it.
Yeah, you brought up, I think, a really good point there. And it's something for everyone to consider. And you might have gone right over it to you, the listener. But Jeff just said, I think, something that's key in today's market. They're not necessarily trying to make profits. They're trying to keep, in other words, they're trying to keep the light. So what they're doing is they're saying, if I could break even this year, like even maybe lose a little bit, but just keep everything moving, I'm in position A for when the market turns. And I'm wondering how many carriers that maybe, or brokers that maybe have investors to think about, maybe publicly traded, that are in a worse position than somebody that has said, okay, if I can lose 5% this year, so I'll cut my rate, I'll do what I got to do, I'll work with people to put myself in position A, as opposed to a company that said, I need to create profit for investors. And I'm willing to bet there's two very different business methodologies that go with it. And the ones that are looking for profits for people are the ones that are going to lose. Interesting comment, Jeff. Really, I mean, something to really think about, right? Because if you're a publicly traded company, your stockholders expect returns, right?
Sure.
So there's that added pressure. Whereas your regional guys or guys that you're working with, Jeff, that are maybe smaller, that say, okay, I'd like $2.10 a mile, but I can do $1.90 a mile and still keep my lights on. Maybe I'll have to break even this year, but it's putting me in that position to do something better next year. And I think all brokers and carriers that operate under that mentality, I think
there's a lot of guys out there that Jeff makes a good point. Like they know their operating costs, but it's about a lifestyle. It's not so much about having to make a set percentage, because in these tough times, a lot of these carriers are just happy to get by. Like they know the good times will come back. They've also been clever enough to put some money away during the good times. So there's a lot of carriers out there that the trucking funds a lifestyle for them.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds bizarre, but there's a lot of independents out there that this is a lifestyle decision for them. I meet them at truck shows every single weekend. And for them, the trucking industry is just fine. And they're probably guys that and girls that Jeff uses in his network, small carriers that are just the backbone of the industry. Jeff, what sort of, in your network, average fleet size? Mostly small fleets, owner-operators, or is it a mix?
Between 20 and 50.
Okay, so this is the group that typically, when we did that study at Freight Waves, this is the group that's mostly in the spot market because they're not big enough to win a major contract and too big for the hometown shipper, typically.
Well, these guys, this is all contracted business. I mean, I signed contracts on it. There's no, here's the rate today, here's the rate for tomorrow, and so forth.
But I think what Dean means, Jeff, is they're too small to get awarded the contracts from shippers.
Sure.
Correct.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So you would give them the contracts because your best provider is typically the 20 to 50 trucks, because you can actually become their sales force and create a dynamic partnership that lasts a decade. Right. As opposed to just kind of being a number at, a bigger carrier like Schneider, for example.
Sure. And the thing is that, and I've had these conversations with them, and I've always said it, and you've heard me say it for months on end. We're all cutting back right now, whether we like it or not. Whether we go to the grocery store, we're cutting back. Instead of buying this, we're stretching things out. We're all in the game together. The carriers are doing it, the shippers are doing it. We as consumers are doing it, whether we like it or not. And we're getting by. That's what the carriers are trying to do. They're getting by. They surely don't want to close up their doors. They really prefer not to do that. But what can they do in the meantime? Well, they want to most likely do business with a shipper that has a lot of business, being that they're big, that when it does come back, they're going to have a lot of freight. They're going to have consistent freight. They're not going to have to hit the boards and find out where their next load is. They want brokers who are in that position, who have that, those type of prospects and customers they're doing business with, because they know it can keep them afloat. That's a big problem now, where the freight is so limited, as we talk about every single week, and there's not many of them out there. So when you do hit a diamond in the rough, those carriers do want to work with you and take that chance and run with you, especially if you're ethical and you tell them you're transparent and you tell them exactly what to expect. I've had carriers come back to me, guys, and ask me for increases. I was like, it's not going to happen. I want to. It's not that I don't want to do it. The shipper is dictating it. I'm trying to set you up into position, A, like I spoke about. I'm not making a lot of profit. I don't need to right now, because I know it's going to come later on, because I'm setting it up for success right then and there. Am I not making money? No, I'm making money. I'm making money, but I'm doing it strategically. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I don't know if I told you guys, I had a guy contact me on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, talking, the market is down, and my customers are leaving me, and what do I do? And I said, well, let's get together and chat, because not enough information for me to give you any advice.
Right.
So it was really interesting, because he said, Dan, he said, I've been working with this customer for about 4 years. I said, okay. And he goes, I started kind of at the beginning of the pandemic. I said, okay. I said, so what kind of margins are you? He goes, well, I make $10,000 a load.
Oh,
I said, pardon?
what?
Yeah. I said, pardon? He goes, yeah, I make $10,000 a load. And I'm like, what is this product? Like, is it worth $10 million? He goes, oh, no, it's not. I said, okay. So I said, hold on here. You're complaining because you're losing a customer where you're making 10 grand GP per load. He said, yeah, I think it's ridiculous. And I said, I think what you're doing is ridiculous. I said, but here's the deal. I said, you got to understand. In today's market, your customer is being called 50 times a week, minimum. I don't care what customer it is. I don't care what manufacturing company it is. Minimum, they're getting 50 solicitations a week. So with that, one person is going to word it, phrase it, give the prospect something where they go, let me check. And now you've just totally priced yourself out for any future business. Because if I was a shipper, and Jeff, you were, if I was a shipper and I looked and somebody said, hey, I can do it for $1,500, and you were $10,150, I'd be like, whoa. It's too much of a gap for me not to look at it. So I said to him, that's your problem. You're the one that caused that problem. Well, do you know? Didn't take it well at all. And just disappeared. Like as if my advice was not what he was looking to hear. And I don't know if he was looking for me to like justify what he was doing, or, oh my God, good for you, did it. And he goes, it's the carrier's fault. I go, it's not the carrier's fault. I go, it's your fault. You're the one that is like, what is wrong with you? Like, even during COVID, if you made $10,000 a load, I'm sorry, you're an asshole, and you deserve to lose your business. Because this is what manufacturers were talking about all the way during COVID. We're getting screwed. And to me, it's just like, just total, like, it's that perspective, and I love your perspective on it, brother.
Yeah, we don't do this for free. None of us. All right. Carriers need to make a profit. Brokers need to make a profit. Shippers need to make a profit. That's how they get paid. All right. So if you're transparent, and to your point a long time ago, Dan, about cost plus is an idea that's been out there. A lot of people don't use that, but at least when you do something like that, they know what they're paying for. You're not getting raked over the coals. A 5%, cost plus 5 or whatever it is, based on volume. The more volume, you give a better discount. Less volume, maybe you want to raise it up a point or two. Whatever, however you want to do it. But at least they know that every time they run that lane, it's $1,000 plus 5% all in. It's not going to change. Then they can live with something like that. But when it starts going like this, they can't create their forecast. They can't create their budget. It's all over the freaking the charts. They switch carriers. They have to reinvent the wheel. Their SG&A is all over. Their freight payment centers all over the place. I mean, they don't think about the backroom additional cost that it costs them when they change carriers, or are not willing to create long-term business relationships. They forget about that. And the carriers don't forget about that. And the brokers don't forget about that. I mean, we're all in it to win it and to survive, the way I look at it.